So, this second part of applied psychology, we are listening to while we're reading one of the earliest treatises on the self from St. Augustine. So, this week, obviously, we're moving on parallel tracks where we're reading an old Christian bishop's writing reflecting on the concept of sin in his life as a young person and how he reflects on who he is and for him, who he is before and after what he calls a religious conversion. And then the other parallel track, the other side of that track is we're exploring modern questions that psychology is asking as we reflect on the self in the 21st century. And I think this will give you a sense of connectedness between the human questions that are always being asked, regardless of the century and regardless of the background. So for this short one, it's only about 10 slides here. The topic that I want you to write down for today's date is needs, motivation, and emotion. This is just an intro. We will return to this when we do neuroscience as we explore the biological aspect of what emotions are when we talk about the nervous system and where they're housed in the brain. But for now, let's just get the brain going. We just want to slowly understand what drives behavior. And the immediate application question, for example, is do you care about doing well in school or not? Why or why? Why or why not? And so, of course, you care in a general sense. Some of you have what we would call an intrinsic motivation. Some of you are internally driven. Others of you are doing things based off of consequences, fear, or standards from the outside, which is part of the quote that you should have commented on last week about we promise according to hope and fulfill according to fear. So there's a lot of this inside outside stuff that comes into play when we talk about needs, motivations, and emotional responses. So we're just going to intro that today so that when we get into the more complicated aspects, we can really have an intelligent conversation. And so when you look at an infant here in this picture and then a homeless person here, I want to talk about this in class. What do each of these types of individuals have in common? What's the most important thing that they need? And sometimes, oddly enough, it throws us off because one seems, smooth and pretty and small and cute and helpless, and the other one's supposed to be grown up with a big body and an adult, and we have expectations on that. But we want to just pull back for a second and ask these questions. What do they have in common, and what do they want and need? To get at the question of what are true core human motivations for meeting their needs. And my thought is humans always get their needs met one way or another, healthy or not, but we are not satisfied with unmet needs. We will find a way to deal with that quote unquote hunger, need, motivation. So it's a fascinating topic, and we'll talk about this in class. What do these people need? What do they want? Think about it, and don't just say gasoline. What are they afraid of? Why are they doing this? Why are they in line? Why would they put up with this situation? What do they need? What do they want? So in your notes, you can put gas line, what do these people need, and have an answer for me, and we'll talk about it. What drives that phenomena? It's happened a couple times here in Dallas. The theoretical understanding of this comes from Maslow's basically hierarchy or pyramid of needs, and at the bottom is physiological needs. And now you understand why I say biology always wins. I don't mean that biology is supreme over other areas of knowledge. I mean that biology is foundational. We don't just have a body, we are a body. And that is true whether you look at that religiously or even evolutionarily speaking. The body is important, and the body has needs, it has limits, and it certainly drives a lot of our behavior. And so that's what I mean biology always wins. And then as you move up, you can talk about different needs and motivations. The breakdown of this pyramid is the size between the needs and that there is a hierarchy. I find, for example, that if aesthetic needs, like if you work in an ugly place, if you're alone in terms of belongingness, if you don't feel safe, these tend to impact your physiology, releasing adrenaline and cortisol, suppressing appetite, making you aggressive. And so we can talk about how one moves through these levels and how they affect each other. But this is how it was drawn out. So there are different types of that you're reading about of how psychology has come to be applied to understanding human behavior. And so there's psychoanalytic theory. You can talk about Freud, that everything we do basically has a subconscious basis for survival or to prevent our own destruction. And so the question applied here is, according to this theory, why do you go to school? Apparently it has something to do with your survival or to avoid, ruin. And so is that a good motivating factor? Is that why you should go? And is that what drives you? I've heard this before. What happens if you fail a test? Well, everything is ruined. The whole world collapses. And you have this scenario. You don't get into college, you don't get that job, you won't get to marry that person, and you won't look successful ad infinitum. And so psychoanalytic theory is always questioning the intrinsic motivation of survival and destruction. So, speaking of intrinsic motivation, we all do certain behaviors because we find them either personally rewarding or we value them in and of themselves. This is the attempt with virtue in the school. It is hard to intrinsically convince and motivate people who are not convinced of the value of, say, honor, respect, service, excellence, or perseverance. But we try to inculcate that, and really, life's experiences will show you why those things are more and more valuable, but that takes time. So, do you have some examples of things that you highly value that motivate you that really have nothing to do with external rewards or consequences? On the opposite end of that is extrinsic motivation, which is not bad. But for example, money is one of the easiest and actually one of the least satisfying rewards for deep work or sustained effort. It's nice to get a bonus. I get bonuses every year. It's nice to get a bump. It's nice to get a stipend. It's better than not getting it. But I don't know if that really that doesn't drive what I do and the choices I make. I have certain things that I'm trying to do, before I'm dead, or that I value. But it would be nice to talk about as a class what extrinsic motivators are there for you guys in this class that keep you going, that do help. Um, so it'd be nice to recognize those. So these are questions that I want you to write down in your notes. We'll have a short discussion, an intro discussion. I'd like to know what you think when we get again to the neuroscience, to brain development. We will talk about the limbic system and where emotions are processed. But you can pause the video here, but I would like to have these in your notes and have some pretty basic answers, a sentence or two at least for each one, because I'd like to call on some of you and know what you think. So how would you define an emotion? Let's get a list of basic human emotions that we want to talk about. How are they expressed? Is it through the face? Is it through hands? So we want to recognize, how do you tell what the emotion is? Is there one that you in particular feel more than others? Does culture have any influence on that whatsoever about how you communicate to others? I think that's a yes, but we want to see how that works for us, what modeling is out there for us. And then, does gender matter? And gender is a tricky term, it's kind of a culture term. I would say, does sex matter, whether someone's male or female? Do we have some stereotypes? Are there some truths? Are there some cultural expectations between men and women? There are clear differences if you observe boys and girls, even in kindergarten or before, but it's hard to really define that in a consistent way. So we want to explore that a bit. Here's a weird one. Does species even matter? I mean, when a dog shows you its teeth, it's not smiling, right? So we can. Darwin was fascinated by animal emotion, and again, this is where I told you I have trouble when people tell me that my dog doesn't have a soul. That word soul is poorly defined. I'm totally convinced my dog has a soul in the psychological sense. Absolutely, it has a mental process and emotions, and she. She certainly has responses and reactions to a number of things. If I say treat, squirrel, or no, right? So there you go. Here's a list of emotions that are included in your text. What is not on here is euphoria, you know, and we'll talk about that in class. But this is from your book, and ones that we'll have to actually unpack. There's probably some that we can combine. My list is actually shorter than this. And then with current disorders today, sometimes it's not the lack of emotion, but it might be just expressiveness. So I think a better question to ask is not whether or not humans possess emotions, like we're not, are we like Spock or something like that, but how do we emote? How do we communicate? How do we express? That is an important question to factor in as well.